Money's gender and the question of influence. At the beginning of this chapter, I suggested that money is commonly regarded in the contemporary context as a social constructionist, a characterization he himself would strongly refute. I also noted that as such, some have claimed him as the darling of second-wave feminism. Money's model of GIR outlined here clearly shows that insofar as the former claim is misguided, the latter too is unlikely to carry any real weight. Indeed, Money's criticism of second-wave feminism's alleged divorcing of sex from gender, combined with the accusation of essentialism made by the very small number of feminists who engaged with Money's work in the period associated with feminism's so-called second wave, clearly points to the dubiousness of such claims. Having said this, however, I do not mean to imply that second-wave feminists embraced a model of gender that was simply opposed to Money's. To do so would be to reaffirm the overly simplistic dichotomy of social constructionism versus biological determinism. What I want to suggest instead is that while at the time of its development, Money's model of GIR had little impact on second-wave feminisms, it does, ironically, and this is a claim that may well make Money turn in his grave, share with many second-wave feminist accounts of gender and unacknowledged dependence on the sex body as somehow foundational. In short, it is my contention that both Money's work on gender and the work of the vast majority of second-wave feminists exemplifies what Linda Nicholson refers to as biological foundationalism. Nicholson explains this term with reference to what she describes as the coat rack view of self-identity. On this model, the rack is the aspect of the self that is common to everyone, or, in the case of feminist writing, to all women. It is the thing on which the cultural aspects of selfhood, the things that make us different, are hung. Money's coat rack is what he calls the phylogenetic, and what gets hung on that foundation are the ontogenetic aspects of GIR. This model is also apparent in the work of diverse thinkers associated with second-wave feminism. For example, anthropologist Gail Rubin introduced the phrase the sex-gender system in her landmark essay The Traffic in Women, 1975, to refer to a set of arrangements by which the biological raw material of human sex and procreation is shaped by human social intervention. Feminism, Rubin argued, should aim to create a genderless, though not sexless, society in which one's sexual anatomy is irrelevant to who one is, what one does, and with whom one makes love. In a very different feminist project from the same era, Janice Raymond vehemently attacked male-to-female transsexuals, in particular those who identified as lesbian, arguing that male-to-constructed female, lesbian feminists can only play the part of women, lesbians, and feminists. Further, she claimed that all male-to-female transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the real female form to an artifact, appropriating this body for themselves. However, the transsexually constructed lesbian feminist violates women's sexuality and spirit as well. Because male-to-female transsexuals have lost their physical members does not mean that they have lost their ability to penetrate women's minds, women's sexuality. Male-to-female transsexuals merely cut off the most obvious means of invading women so that they can seem non-invasive. However, as Mary Daly has remarked in the case of the transsexually constructed lesbian feminists, their whole presence becomes a member, invading women's presence and dividing us once more from each other. While I do not want to claim that Raymond explicitly posits a distinction between sex and gender, nature and culture in her work, the criticism she aims at male-to-females clearly imply the existence of a sexuality, a spirit, a body that is particular to all women and that is not, by definition, shared by men. And even though Raymond recognizes differences between men, for example, not all men want to be transsexuals, it nevertheless seems that fundamentally all men are the same, at the very least insofar as they are not and cannot ever be women. This sense of sex-shared characteristics is also apparent in Carol Gilligan's 1983 work on what she perceives as a universal proclivity among women for relatedness. While Gilligan, like Raymond, describes this tendency as an aspect of women's culture, that is, as something that occurs in and through social processes and organization, rather than solely as a result of biology, there is a sense in which both writers claim a strong universalizing correlation between people with certain biological characteristics, that is, penises or vaginas, and people with certain character traits. As Nicholson notes, claims that women are different from men or vice versa in such and such ways ultimately function to constitute certain characteristics as female or male, and in doing so, to naturalize the differences purportedly described. These differences, Nicholson claims, tend to reflect the perspective of those making the characterizations, and to reflect the biases of particular social groups, most often those in a position of power and/or authority, a claim I will return to in a moment. In pointing out what I, following Nicholson, identify as the biological foundationalism of these very different projects, it is not my intention to conflate them, and in so doing, to flatten out the important theoretical and political differences between them. Indeed, what I find so useful about this concept is that it enables a move beyond the black and white logic of the essentialism versus constructionism debate. It allows, indeed it calls for, an analysis of the nuances of particular positions and the similar and different effects they produce. As Nicholson puts it, biological foundationalism is not equivalent to biological determinism. All of its forms, though some more extensively so than others, include some element of social construction. Biological foundationalism is best understood as representing a continuum of positions. This counters a commonplace contemporary tendency to think of social constructionist positions as all alike in the role that biology plays within them. Given this, the question is not so much whether biological foundationalism is a good thing or a bad thing, since clearly it generates heterogeneous effects even within one particular perspective, nor is it a question of how to best clarify gender, or of which conception is most correct, if, as Nicholson claims, the clarification of the meaning of any concept is stipulative, rather than merely describing a given reality, then it is so within the context of a particular regime of truth, within a particular discipline and/or set of disciplinary practices. Our conceptions of gender are, to quote Nicholson again, situated. They emerge from our own places within history and culture. They are political acts that reflect the context we emerge out of and the futures we would like to see. Nowhere is this clearer than in Money's work on transsexualism, in which he simultaneously claims to know of no proven cause of gender identity disorder, and yet turns to studies on animals to explain how hormonal coding can affect the GIR of sheep who have been androgenized and thereafter try to mount other ewes and are not approached by rams. Androgenized female monkeys who played more boisterously than normal female monkeys and whose assertiveness and mating behavior fell somewhere in between the normal male and female, and of developmentally normal white leghorn roosters whose sexual attraction to and mounting of a headless model of a chicken demonstrates the fact that non-cross-coded men's erotic arousal, including erection of the penis, is eye-sensitive and can be rather easily triggered by a visual stimuli. To a humanities scholar, these claims, and the experiments that make them possible, may appear extremely spurious, and yet in the context in which Money carried out his research, it seems they were not. Moreover, the fact that experiments on animals continue to be carried out, in huge numbers, and often in ways that are, to many, inhumane, in the hope that they will one day provide the keys to the differences between the sexes, is both mind-boggling and profoundly telling in terms of the investment contemporary cultures clearly have in the difference they seem so desperately to desire. If, as Nelson Goodman has stated, scientific development always starts from worlds already on hand, then one wonders what world shaped Money's ideas and his practice. While a definitive answer to this question is, no doubt, impossible, I want to suggest that one such world is the field of sex endocrinology, including, and perhaps particularly, its uptake by biologists and zoologists, and, more particularly, what has come to be known as brain organization theory. As a consequence, Money's work has tended to find its biggest influence not, as some have suggested, in feminism, or even in politicized accounts of gendered selfhood more generally, but rather in brain organization research, and in the largely clinical discourses and practices surrounding intersexuality and transsexualism.